Chapter 4. After school, Bullitt jogged down to the field without changing. He ran in sneakers, and in hot weather he just wore a pair of shorts to school under his jeans. Bullitt didn't mind practice. The coach left him pretty much alone. The coach was a big guy, over 200 pounds, but in good shape for all of his 50-odd years. He'd played baseball good enough for collegiate championships in his day. He coached baseball in the spring, track in the fall, and filled in with gym classes during the winter. Summers he worked as a lifeguard for a pool up in Delaware. He'd always known enough to leave Bullitt alone, ever since Bullitt showed up in the fall of 9th grade. The track team wasn't much, mostly guys who couldn't make the football team but were too serious about sports to want to take gym. The coach worked them, keeping track of all of them, sprinters and milers, high and long jumpers, hurdlers, pole vaulters, javelin throwers, and the cross-country too. They each had to enter 3 events, he told them, because the school had to have 4 people in each event to hold a meet against another school. Bullitt did javelin throw and high jump with cross-country. Once the coach had asked him to do the 1,500-meter run, or hurdles, because he was fast, but Bullitt wouldn't. The first year he was on the track team, he'd run the relay, but after that he picked his own events. His run was cross-country, and he didn't want to use up energy on any other running event. He usually came in somewhere between 2nd and 5th in high jump and javelin, depending on the competition. He'd never lost a cross-country race, never even come close to losing. The team was always invited to the state championships, but the school never placed because the rest of the team wasn't good enough. You got 10 points for a first, but only 5, 3, 2 for the other places. Only Bullitt could collect the 10. He didn't mind. He'd been state champion for 2 years. The coach minded some, but Bullitt couldn't help him with that. If you didn't have the talent to put on the field, you just didn't have it. Bullitt's accumulated points over the season got them into the championship trials, and that was all he could do for them. The first part of practice Bullitt spent warming up with a few jumps and throws. He took it easy. If he jumped over 6.5, he started landing wrong, pulling muscles or bruising joints he needed in good working order for cross-country. He could get up as high as he wanted, higher than any of the other jumpers, but he took it easy against the risk of spraining or breaking something when he came down. You land like some rag doll, Tillerman, the coach said. You've got to roll with it. Use your shoulders. Bullitt shrugged. He could get high enough. A 2-mile cross-country trail had been laid out behind the field, so familiar that Bullitt could run it without thinking, which wasn't much use to him. That day, early in September, the coach stopped Bullitt as he went over to start the runners. "That new guy, see him?" Bullitt nodded, his eyes on the tall Negro with heavy muscular legs, long thighs, and short calves, who stood away from the other 2 cross-country entrants, both white. "He might be okay for cross-country. He's a hurdler, pretty good." "Okay," Bullitt said. He knew what the coach was going to say next. He always knew. "See how he goes," he predicted. "See how he goes. And don't try to run him out this first time. And don't try to run him out this first time." Bullitt didn't say anything. He stood in the sunlight, waiting to be given the nod to go. The coach nodded to him. The Negro approached Bullitt near the start. He held his hand out. Bullitt didn't take it to shake. The Negro acted as if nothing had happened. "Name's Tamer. Tamer Ships. He tells me I should run cross-country." Bullitt didn't say anything. This Tamer looked older than most high school students. He looked about 20. But Negroes tended to look older. They aged differently, too. Something to do with the skin, he figured. The old Negroes around town had white-gray hair, but their skin didn't look dried out and papery. The other 2 runners were a 10th and 11th grader. Neither had the musculature of this Tamer, or Bullitt either. Tamer had close-cropped black hair and deep brown skin, broad nose and full lips, and, under heavy eyebrows, eyes that looked awake. "Okay," he said now. "I read you, Whitey. Just tell me what to do." "Run," Bullitt said. "Run as fast as you can and keep running." "You sure does make it sound fun, massa," Tamer said. His mouth didn't move, but his eyes looked amused. "Beats picking cotton." Tamer had a broad, stubborn jaw, and it looked like he needed a shave. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Bullitt shrugged. Tamer's big shoulders straightened. They moved apart, going separately and at different rates to the starting point, where a broad dirt path entered a stand of pines. The 2 other runners came to join Bullitt. "Hey," they said without eagerness. "Hey, Bullitt." He nodded at them. raised one arm, and let it fall abruptly to start them off. The 2-mile course made a big circle. It covered no hills, neither were there any ditches, but it crossed some fields and a couple of creeks. It wasn't much of a course, but people were more interested in football, basketball, and baseball. That was where the money for fields, coaches, and equipment went, and cheerleaders and uniforms. It didn't hurt Bullitt any. It just pissed him off to have to run on such a rinky-dink course. He ran the practice the same way he ran every race. He took up an immediate lead and pulled further ahead with each step. He ran alone. Up rises, leaping shallow gullies, splashing through the creeks where the muddy bottoms caught at his shoes. He ran beside a tomato field with just a few fat globules ripening on the vines now, a bright green red of late-season tomatoes. He couldn't hear anything, nobody. His legs stretched out, the pace fast and steady. He picked up his pace and beat after the first half mile. He held the new pace for the quarter mile, and then, rounding a big cornfield to head back for the mile, picked his pace up again. He breathed steadily through his nose. He never got out of breath. A real runner never did, because it wasn't lungs that took the strain, but muscles. The hardest thing for Bullitt about the daily practices was to keep driving his pace. He knew the course so well he didn't even have to think about where to put his feet or how to take an obstacle. Even the section through overgrown woods had a path trampled through it, and all you did was scratch your legs as you went through. So Bullitt used the practice times for his own purpose. He ran 3/4 of it at top speed and worked during the last quarter to improve that. Back at the starting point, his legs feeling good, the sweat running over him feeling good, he waited around for the other runners to come in. The 2 underclassmen had been running the course for a week and a half now. They should begin to come in at a jog at least. The first couple of times around, he'd had to wait 20 minutes and a half hour for them to come walking and groaning in, trying to pick up their knees to shambling gait when they saw him watching. By now they should be able to get some kind of pace over the 2-mile course. If they would do any practicing at home, of course, it would be different. But nobody ever did. For the first 2 or 3 meets, Bullitt could be sure he'd be the only Crisfield runner to finish out a course. Somehow these guys seemed to think that if they could run 2 miles, they could automatically run the 3 or 4 of a race. He had no sympathy for them. He kind of liked watching them creep across the finish lines of the meets and bend over to vomit. But it was the Negro who came first into view after a long wait. His T-shirt was soaked with sweat, his chest heaved, he jogged steadily. As Bullitt watched, he stumbled over a buried stone and fell flat. You had to be pretty tired to let a stumble like that knock you flat. Bullitt watched as he brought himself back up to his knees, then up to his feet, then, leaning forward, barely running at all, started jogging again, stubbornly. Light brown dust caked his legs and arms in splotches. His thighs and arms and face shone with a coating of sweat that ran in rivulets down through the dust. He breathed through his open mouth, breathed hard. When he came up to Bullitt just over the finish, he fell full length onto his hands, like a reverse push-up. He lowered himself onto the ground and lay there, face down. His back heaved. His hair was beaded with water. His eyes were closed. The other 2 jogged sedately into sight. Bullitt looked at them. They hadn't changed their pace for the last stretch, and they talked as they jogged. He looked down at the Negro. Then he turned and went to take a shower. Negroes did well in the marathon. It seemed like it was always some guy from Ethiopia or Africa who won it, so it wasn't surprising that this tamer had come in ahead. It didn't worry Bullitt. It barely interested him. It showed up how worthless those other 2 were. Somebody should go behind them with a bullwhip, he thought, get their asses going. Bullitt grinned to himself. He could do it. He could make them, but he wasn't interested. He wanted a shower. Then he was going downtown to see Billy O. Nobody ever ran cross-country more than 1 season. Nobody except Bullitt. It was just too hard. Bullitt slid into his chair at the center of a long side of the wooden table. At one end his father sat, a platter of fried ham slices in front of him, a bowl of rice, and a plate of corn on the cob beside him, wearing a tie and jacket. 3 plates were stacked up in front of him. A bowl of sliced tomatoes was in front of Bullitt. Bullitt had a glass of milk. His parents had water. His father's hands were under the table, folded in his lap. The eyes were fixed on the hands. Bullitt's mother sat straight and still at the other end. As soon as he heard Bullet's chair scrape into place, the old man started reciting grace, the same every evening. "For what we are about to receive, the Lord make us truly thankful," he said. He served the plates, Bullet's mother first, then Bullet, then himself. A slice of fried ham, a spoonful of rice, an ear of corn. "There's no reason to eat in an uncivilized manner just because we're poor," his father had said so often. Bullet used to believe that was what he meant. That was why he required them all to dress for each dinner. But he'd figured out finally what the old man was really up to, that it was just another order he was giving. Bullet passed his mother's plate down to her and caught her speculative glance. He pulled the knitted watch cap down further over his ears and waited. It wasn't until everybody had been served that Bullet's father looked at him. "Pass the butter," he said, and then, his eyes having slid over Bullet, "Take off that hat." Bullet obeyed. He reached up and removed the woolen cap, dropping it onto the floor beside his chair. His mother looked up at him, then quickly away. Her dark hazel eyes flashed briefly, Bullet saw, and her mouth twitched before she settled her face into expressionlessness. She picked up her knife and made a quick cut into the slab of meat. Bullet waited for what his father would say and ate his dinner while he waited, ate slowly and methodically. "I'll take some mustard," his father said. "There's none," his mother answered. After a while his father said, "We'll need more butter." "We're almost out," his mother answered. "It's time to do a shopping. I won't be going into town for another week, or more." Bullet's mother looked down the table, then nodded, her mouth still. She'd have to sail in, then 2 to 4 hours, depending on how the wind lay, and if a wind was whipping up waves or it rained. The bags would get wet and disintegrate, carrying them up from the dock. Too bad. "I'll need some money," was all she said. "I can spare $15, his father answered. Bullet reached out to take 2 more ears of corn. At $15 for a week's food, they'd be eating hungry. His father wouldn't touch crabs and never had, wouldn't have the smell of them in the kitchen. Too bad, because crabs were free for the trapping. Any fish she could get cheap downtown could only be eaten the same day, with the long sail to spoil it. Chicken, too, was likely to turn in this hot weather, with the long midday calms when sails flapped uselessly and the tide carried you where it was going. "I said cut," the old man spoke to him now, "not shaved." Bullet shrugged. "And what are you going to do about it?" "There's long precedent for adolescent rebelliousness," his father spoke to his plate. The man had pale eyes and white hair in a crew cut. He was a big, spare man like Johnny. "Aristotle refers to it. You know who he is." "You won't know who he is." "Oh, yeah?" "Just because there's precedent doesn't mean I find it tolerable." "Tough on you." "I don't want to lay eyes on you until it's grown out." Bullet shrugged. "Then keep 'em closed, old man." Billy O had told him it needed shaving every day or so. "He won't be eating with us now." Bullet's mother nodded. Her hair was getting long streaks of gray in it, woven down through the braid. "You needn't bother fixing anything for him. He can see to himself. You'll eat with me." She nodded again, not saying anything. "Since he's determined to have his own way, he can have his way all to himself." Fair enough. He could run before he ate now. Without looking at him, his father asked, "Do you hear, Samuel?" "Yes, sir," Bullet answered, "and if you think I care, you can think again." "Then why are you still sitting here?"